Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. This month sees the celebration of Autistic Pride Day, and we thought what better way to mark the occasion than to create a best-of collection of some of our favourite interviews over the last 5 series. Can you believe it? 5 series! Throughout the show, you'll hear from some amazing guests speaking about what being autistic means to them, their stories of diagnosis, through to the strengths autistic people bring to the workplace, and how to make the working world better to enable neurodivergent people to thrive. Finally, we'll hear from our guests about what they hope to see in the future to make life better for our autistic community. Our guests include social media influencers Connor Ward, Ella Tabb, also known as Purple Ella, and Dan Jones from the Aspie world. Me, Carrie Grant, TV's Chaser Anne Hegarty, author Kathy Lett, business leader Holly Branson, Ben Pearson, the entrepreneurial founder of Big Clothing for You, micro sculptor Dr. Willard Wigan, actor Tylen Grant, Phillip Scott, responsible business manager at Deloitte, Cheney Ray, better known as the singer Cray, and finally, student Louise Chandler, also known as social media influencer neurodivergent Lou, and content creator Callum Stephen Howes, known online as Autistic Callum. Phew! It's a packed episode full of brilliant insights, and I couldn't think of a better way to mark what it means to be autistic and proud. Happy Autistic Pride Day! Now, before we get on to the show, Connor has made a great suggestion that we ask our autistic contributors here what it means to be autistic as a sort of Kickstarter. So, Connor, seeing as you suggested it, let's start with you.
To me, I feel it's about me having a brain that focuses on the detail and enjoys the detail, processes the detail before building out to a bigger picture. And that's opposite to a neurotypical, someone who's not neurodivergent, who will look at the big picture first and work their way into the details. And it manifests in various different areas of life.
I love that. I feel that's very filmic. Very good. Okay, Ella.
Yeah, for me, being autistic is about being extremely sensitive in a world that was not designed for people that are extremely sensitive, and a different way of looking at things, often a really passionate way of looking at things that stands out as different amongst neurotypical people.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that completely. And for you, Dan?
Yeah, for me, being autistic is it's kind of like how can I explain? It's like having you're on display to show the world what autism looks like, right? So you have a responsibility to show everybody in an educational format what it looks like, and I think that we all carry that kind of responsibility. So that's what it feels like to me.
That's so interesting, because that's something that many other communities would say, that the pressure of representation can be really quite overwhelming. I hadn't even thought about that for our community here, but that's really interesting.
Carrie, we've had the privilege of working with you on 4 series of the podcast now, and your insights have always been invaluable. We're really looking forward to hearing things from the other side of the fence today, and I know you have an announcement to share.
Yes, so what I've loved, just being involved in the autism world as I have been for probably about 15 or so years now. One of the things I've loved is just an affinity with that community. And I thought that affinity was because of my children and my heart. I have a very empathetic heart. And I've always kind of connected with people that are slightly different, throughout my life, even before I had children. These are the people that I've always felt like are my people. And actually, throughout the last few years, as I've gone through life, there's been so many autistic people who have said to me, Carrie, when are you going to go and get an assessment? And I've maybe we can talk a little bit more about what led to it. But so I had an assessment this year. We're currently in 2023 as we're recording this. And in January of this year, I was diagnosed as autistic. And, I feel like it just came at the right time in my life. I think that for many people, they feel like it didn't come at the right time and they wish they'd known sooner. But I think for me, I've known for a long while that I've got traits, but I'm one of those people who really believes that you shouldn't say you're autistic unless you've actually got a diagnosis. And if you haven't, I know obviously if you're awaiting a diagnosis, maybe that's slightly different. But I think because we've been so used to people bandying around, oh yeah, I'm a bit autistic, those kind of tropes, you don't really, I've always really respected our people who are actually diagnosed. And so now being actually diagnosed myself, I feel like I'm now an official member of the club. So first up, I wanted to ask each of you about diagnosis, certainly to Anne, Jules and Willard. Starting with you, Anne, what came first for you? Was it your career on the chase or your autism diagnosis?
I started on the chase in 2010 and I got diagnosed in 2005. So I wasn't yet a chaser at that time.
Yes.
I'd started in about 2003. I had just started beginning to wonder whether perhaps Asperger's syndrome or autism might be something that explained a lot of things about me that I didn't previously understand. And I started pursuing a diagnosis, managed to get one in 2005 from a lady who actually specialised in diagnosing, how do we put this? Children whose IQs are perhaps not as high as mine. At that time, I was working not as a journalist. I worked as a journalist for about 10 years, but for 20 years, I worked as a proofreader in the publishing industry, which was a creative job and did involve I have particular autistic skills that were very applicable to that kind of job. So I find it a lot easier to advise people on how to get into proofreading than I would how to be a chaser, because honestly, I just kind of tripped and fell into the chaser job. It was sort of accidental and just happened to be in the right place at the right time, talking to the right people. But I was diagnosed 2005. What it was mostly useful for, actually, was at the time I was really struggling with my career, and I had help from a social worker and social services generally. And one thing was I actually got disability living allowance, and my job seekers allowance was also bumped up. And I always say there are very few problems that can't be solved with enough money. So that basically was the advantage for me at the time of getting diagnosed.
And what about your feelings about that diagnosis? Did you see it as a positive thing at that point?
Yes, I mean, I was very relieved that that people agreed with me that I'd gone through all the diagnostic criteria. I'd gone through the ICD-10 and also the DSM in America. Their criteria for both autism and Asperger's syndrome. And I ticked off just so many things. I actually drew up a spreadsheet of, I drew up a table of criteria and things I used to do as a child, things I still do, things my dad did. And I presented these tables to my GP, and he said, honestly, the fact that you've just done these in itself suggests to me you're probably autistic.
I love that. I love that you probably did a better diagnostic criteria than the one that you were about to face.
Possibly. I mean, I just felt it was important to... People have sometimes said to me, I understand you identify as autistic. I'm like, no, I don't identify as anything in any way. I objectively conform to scientific criteria drawn up by people who aren't me. And I wanted to actually see a specialist because, I could be wrong. Maybe there's some other explanation instead. And I wanted to know what they thought.
So this was your first child, Jules, right? And at what point did you start to think there's something different about this child?
Well, it's hard when it's your first child because you've got no benchmark. And so he never slept, and he was really anxious as a baby. And if I left the room, he would be hysterical with anxiety. And I just thought maybe that was normal. But my mother's a teacher, and of course she's had 4 children. And so she was the first one who said to me, I think there might be a couple of issues, we should see a psychologist and see what was going on. But in those days, Jules is 31 now. So back then, how old are your kids?
So I've got 4 children. The autistic children are 20 and 16.
Right. Well, back when Jules was diagnosed, he was diagnosed at age 3. The A word was almost like a death sentence. The A word was, suddenly my son had become a plant in a gloomy room, and it was my job to kind of drag him into the light. It really branded you. It was almost like saying you had cancer. Like, it was really damning. So it's so wonderful that we've moved on from those dark days. And then it was really hard to get help too. There was hardly any help. And of course, the government set up bureaucratic speed bumps to slow down a parent's progress. And they encouraged you then to put them in a mainstream school. And to me, putting a kid with autism in a mainstream school is as pointless as giving a fish a bath. They really need specialist help and focus and attention. And the classroom was too loud. And, most kids were striving at school to learn, math and grammar. And Jules was just striving to make himself invisible. And he screamed every day I took him. He screamed and kicked and had a meltdown every day for, 10 years. And I used to take him to school, and then I'd come back and just curl up in a fetal position on the ground and just go hyperventilating because he hated it. It was just so. It was, I always think of how autism must feel some of the time. The Edward Munch, The Scream, where everything's too loud, too bright, too vivid, and so confusing. So as school, a classroom, well, it must just be torture, I think.
Yeah, so I think just sort of simply put, diversity means we've got to recognise and we've got to embrace and we've got to include everyone in society from all walks of life. Nobody should be excluded from anything. Just because someone might be neurodivergent or transgender or an immigrant, they might be a refugee or an ex-offender, it doesn't mean they should be excluded from any part of life. And I really think that we need to be celebrating these differences, because I think that's what makes the world so exciting, doesn't it? It makes it vibrant. Everyone needs to be given the opportunity to just be their true self without any barriers of discrimination. And I think that embracing diversity just makes life so much more fun and interesting. I was really lucky. I was brought up in a family that really valued getting to know different people, different cultures, and finding out about their lives. And I feel really extremely grateful to my mum and dad for instilling that in my brother and I, because it just makes life so much more fuller. When I think about neurodiversity specifically, I've got a dyslexic father, I've got a dyslexic husband, and I possibly have a dyslexic son. He's just going through all the tests. And so, but with dad, I really knew, the pros and the cons, or the positives and the negatives of being dyslexic, and so it's really interesting to see that and see the struggles that have happened with that. But when I was younger, I went to a school where you had to go to either cadet training or you had to go to do volunteering. And I decided I wanted to go and volunteer in an autistic school when I was 16. And it was just so brilliant to learn those different forms of how you deal with different people. So the autistic school I went to, it was severely autistic kids who really struggled with any form of eye contact or physical touch. And, as a 16-year-old, my instinct was, if someone was upset, to give them a hug. And you learn very quickly that doesn't work with a very autistic person. And their teachers taught us how you can do very different things like clapping games, and you can have different ways of showing how you care towards an autistic person. I just think experiences like that, not only are they rewarding, but they teach you that everyone is different. And I think if we can educate more people to get firsthand experience in how everyone is really different, whether it comes to just differences in gender. I'm not 100% certain single-sex schools are the right way forward either. Different ethnicities, different sexualities. Everyone's got their different thoughts. I think everyone's got to have that really broad mindset and experience to be able to embrace people. And so I'm so grateful that I had that experience. It gave me a lot of an understanding of autism, and it made me understand the importance of really looking at a whole person, not just what you see on the outset, because the kids that I were with, it was quite nerve-wracking to begin with when you see someone rocking in a corner, but when you take the time, you really just see how the personality in there of these young kids was absolutely incredible and how bright they were. But on the surface, you couldn't necessarily see that. And if we could just try and get more people to have loads of different experiences, I think the world would be a better place. There's loads of research now also just to show that having a diverse workforce is really good for your profits. And so it doesn't have to be profit or purpose. That's one of the things that I bang on about, is that it both goes hand in hand. I think, what Auticon does with hiring people with autism is a really good example, as you know, Carrie. Like, many people on the autistic spectrum they're talented in ways a workplace needs. And I think that's the message that people have to get across. You're not doing that person, you're not being kind to that person doing something nice for them. You're doing something nice because your business also needs it too. And autistic people have the most amazing mindset when it comes to sort of lateral thinking and problem solving, pattern recognition. These are qualities that workplaces need nowadays.
Ben, talk me through your propensity to overwork.
I overwork. Well, I don't call it overworking, really. I always think I underwork because I always want more. And I'm a bit like Chris Dawson, who owns The Range. I just want more, and unless I'm dropping something, I'm not working enough, and that's the thing. I actually think some of my biggest successes have come from my biggest failures, and that might sound a bit backwards and a bit conflicting, but actually I love making mistakes. But why? Because I learn things and I do things differently. People are all, and this is why I think people on the spectrum have an inner genius. I think it just needs to be brought out, and I think this is why more awareness of autism, people can help them bring this out and understand it in them and get it into the modern world. So the reason why I speak like this is because over the last few years I've been making mistakes, and I've been trying not to make mistakes, but actually through those mistakes have come the biggest success. My company turns over millions now, and I tell you, it's certainly not from a textbook. It's from making mistakes and doing things that other people simply wouldn't have the to do. I don't, if I set myself challenges and I test those fears, I feel the fear and I do it anyway. I actually like fear. I like listening to my inner child. My inner child say, no, don't do that. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take you on. I'm going to do that. You don't want to do it? Let's go. Let's do this. So that's one of the things about me. I like the challenge. I like the adrenaline, and I like to prove other people wrong. So yeah, I work day and night, and that's how this business started. It started from a bedroom. I started when I was homeless. I was literally on the streets with soup, from food banks, and just sleeping on people's couches and stuff like that. And I visualize, and I think this is another thing that resonates with a lot of people that are autistic. They have visualization, and that's one of the things you need in business. Is you need to be able to visualize where you want to be. So I used to visualize whoever I wanted to be, whether I wanted to be Richard Branson or the Queen. I would just have this in my mind, and
That's a nice combo.
Yeah, too right. And it would just start slipping off my tongue. I can put a tang to the end of my words, and I can just be who I want to be. And I think this is a thing that more people need to take on board. You don't need to be the person you are yesterday. Be the person you want to be today, not the person that other people want you to be, and just keep working and you will get there.
That's one of the things I do feel about many autistic, not all, but many autistic people I meet and hang with, is that there is this ability and agility to be who they want to be, because I think in some ways a neurotypical brain says, right, this is set in stone for life now. This is who I am for life. And this is who I'm going to be. And then they don't go, because they've got the box, they're not allowed to go to the left or to the right. Whereas I think a neurodivergent mind actually is continually developing and continually reinventing. And that's one of the things I really love when I talk to many autistic creatives, is that it's not just about their work being reinvented, but also their personality, their character, the way they look. All of it is just continually on the move.
I suppose it was like being in quicksand, but you're sinking into this autistic world. But at the bottom, there's like a treasure chest of skills that I've found because of the autism. It also made me sort of accept it and use it as an ability to be able to be an inspiration to people who have it and people who don't, because autism is a diamond in a dustbin, because humanity has a habit of underestimating people with learning differences and autism and dyslexia, because they automatically feel that they use the word unable, disable, or whatever they want to use, whatever terms they want to use. But I knew that I had to defend myself with the ability that I had. And my mother told me that because of it, you better... She didn't know that I had it then, because it was back early in the 1960s when I was 5 years old, 6, 7, 8, all the way up. When I made houses for ants, when my dog destroyed an ant's nest, I felt sorry for the ants, because I kept thinking all the ants were homeless, so I became possessed.
I love that.
That's
such a great concept.
Because I kept thinking that all the ants have got nowhere to live, and I took it personal. So I thought, if I make lots of little houses for them, they'll all move in. And I made a little. I got a leaf, and I made a palace for the queen ant out of a leaf, and then I made tables and chairs. I made seesaws and swings, and then when I'd made this, because it happened because of my dog destroying this ant's nest, and I had to thank my dog. If I could wake him up from the dead, I'd thank him, because that was when I found out who I was, because I lost me.
Yes.
So when I found me a bit later on in life, but once I made all these little houses for ants and I made furniture for ants and all that, one of the girls next door looked over the fence and seen it, and I heard her say, "Wow, that's the bestest." And then when I heard that word, because when I was at school, my school teacher used to say to me that, because I couldn't spell, I couldn't read, she used to take me around the whole school and tell all the kids about me, and more or less I was a consequence of failure, because I couldn't spell, couldn't read, had disorientation problems, and I couldn't communicate properly. So she says, right, this is what happens to children if they don't listen to the teachers. Because back in the 60s, I'm now 64, nearly 65. So back then, it was allowed. They were allowed to humiliate.
Yeah.
So once I was humiliated, my left leg was in school, my right leg wasn't.
Yeah.
So I my body was there, my mind was. So when I ran away from school, I was in the garden making these little houses for ants, and this little girl looked over the fence and she saw what I made, and then she says, "Wow, that's the bestest." Yeah. Now, when I heard that, I tell you what it's like. You see, people who understand autism, if I was doing this at 5 or 6,
flicking your hand,
and just that, and you told me I was really good at that, I'd be doing that for the rest of my life, because you just told me that.
Yes.
So what happened when she said to me that was the bestest? It was like being in a shower, and each droplet of water was washing away everything negative that was said to me. So I took it to an extremity. You now just told me that I'm good. And then a mother came down and she told her mother, she said, "Look at that, Mum." And her mum went, "Oh, wow, that's fantastic." So now I'm in the shower again with more encouragement. And then when my mother seen it, my mother said, she was so overwhelmed. My mother said to me, "If you make them smaller, your name's going to get bigger." So I became possessed to create the smallest sculptures in the world. So autism became a message. You see what I mean? It's an education. It's a diamond in the dustbin, because humanity has a habit of throwing autistic people away, invisible, to say, oh, you don't exist. But when they take the lid off the dustbin, they realise
there's
a
a diamond in
there.
there. Yes.
And that's what autism is. So
can you just, for our listeners, just tell me how tiny, when we say tiny, we're talking really tiny, aren't we, your sculptures?
I can go down to about 5 microns. I made a baby, and I put a baby inside a human hair. And that's the smallest sculpture ever made by man. I put a motorbike inside a hair made of 24 karat gold. And I called it the Golden Journey. I called it the journey to me showing the world how big autism is.
Tylen, for you, what changes have been made in the work? You're one of the lead characters in Hollyoaks. What changes were made for you and have been made for you?
I think from the jump, when it came to Hollyoaks, it wasn't really a case of even it being one thing for me and then them having to change. Like, I think from the beginning, they were very clear that they wanted to understand and help in any way that they can. And so, I mean, even in the audition, they told me who I'd be seeing, I guess the process and stuff like that. And like, I had done auditions before, but I have never had an experience like that where they were actually kind of adjusting to other people's needs and like helping them in that way, so they know what's happening and like the little things like that. I guess also just the reassurance on set and the clear communication as well. And I mean, from the jump, it was like very clear that they were not seeing me as a burden, and it was a thing where they wanted to get it right. And it was less on, I guess, me and more of just them doing things maybe slightly different. Or
I love what you're saying there, Tylen, about it being less on you. I think so often autistic people grow up with that feeling like, I've now got to see how much I can possibly shapeshift and change my entire being in order to fit in with the world. But you're talking about Hollyoaks, actually them thinking differently. They had a different mindset to perhaps the other experiences you'd had before.
Yeah, and they wanted to know things that maybe I would need help with or I would struggle with on set, or things that would help and stuff like that. They asked me beforehand, before I even got the part as well, my second callback. And I really appreciated that, because at first I was kind of nervous about speaking vocally about like the things that I struggle with and my experiences, because I thought maybe that would like make them not want to work with me, or it would make me too difficult. But they were super understanding and they wanted me to be honest. And yeah, so it was really nice.
Yeah, I think that's interesting how many people don't disclose that they are autistic for that very reason. They don't want to feel like they're a burden. And I feel like for you at that point, everything turned on its head almost. Like, hang on a minute, they're asking me what I want. I'm not used to being asked what I want. What do I say? Yeah,
it's usually like, what can you change about yourself?
And part
rather than
of
like, what can we change?
Yes, exactly. So finally, we move on to our looking to the future section. As anyone who's listened to the podcast will know, we often use this final section of the podcast to look ahead and discuss some of the things we'd like to see happening. I don't know, let's dream 10 years from now, if we wanted things to be better for autistic people. Let's go to you, Phillip, first. You know, what do you think what would you like to see happen in your company or elsewhere? You've obviously been there 17 years. You've seen a lot of change. Let's just look forward 10 years. Where would you like to see things for autistic people?
So it's interesting, because I think like the statistics point to 22% of autistic adults in employment. There's a massive gap there. Actually, I think it's seeing that number increase, and one of the things I think organizations can do is to hire more autistic individuals, but also, challenge themselves to have the environment right for those individuals to feel like their strengths can be brought forward, and that they can feel safe and welcomed and not be not be judged, essentially, and so that they can be their very best selves. So I would like to see, in the future, many more businesses coming out and really challenging themselves to expand the opportunities for neurodiverse individuals across the firm. And also, I think one of the things that I think we lack in business and society is representation of neurodiversity across the business, and particularly at senior levels. I kind of look at, our media or government and senior leaders within business, and, I think there needs to be much more representation of autism and neurodiversity within those spheres.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say particularly adding to that in business, particularly in the interview part of businesses, if we want more than 22% of people getting into jobs, we've got to think about the way that we interview people, because most of the interview, once you're past the form, it's all about social skills. How much do I relate to this person or this panel of people that are talking to me? That's not always the best way to get the best out of an autistic person who may be absolutely brilliant for the job, but just finds that bit that you make that hurdle to jump over to get a space around the table is difficult.
And I think that's where, I certainly think that Auticon stand out for me as an organisation who don't necessarily focus on CVs or, the traditional form of recruitment. And I've seen an increase. If I'm looking at best practice out there, it's those organisations that are really fundamentally changing their recruitment processes so that it is more accessible for people. And that's everything from totally blind recruitment through to, just a much less stressful recruitment process. It's actually, I think I heard someone on a previous podcast say just how bizarre an interview actually is in reality. If you took a step back from it and look at it and think, actually, this is really weird, because it's not focused on an individual's strengths or
they're confounding.
Yeah, it's very, I think from my perspective, yes, a much more open and accessible recruitment process that focuses entirely around an individual's strengths, capabilities and needs. And I think also recruitment for me it's given both sides an opportunity to check it's the right fit. And I think historically it's always been a one-sided type thing. It's very important for an individual.
Very, very good point.
To feel like they're choosing the right job for them as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone needs to be a little more open-minded, and I feel like it's real, especially, I don't know, in other countries, but America specifically, I feel like if people don't experience it themselves, they don't understand or can't make room for it. So it's like, I don't know what that being autistic is. I've never seen it, so I don't think that's a real thing. When it's like, I think every day I walk by, no matter if you want to identify as a cat, if you want to wear whatever you want to wear, if you want to do whatever you want to do, I am just here to experience. So I wish more people would just be accepting and let autistic neurodivergent people into the space without judgment. That's where I feel like neurodivergent people really thrive, is being able to be themselves and not be made fun of. That's what I think boxes us up, is when we get so knocked down and so bullied that we don't even want to try anymore.
Yeah. Okay, Lou, let's turn to you. What advice, I'm just thinking about someone who's just been newly diagnosed. What advice would you give to that new person who's just gone, or that person who's got a new diagnosis?
I think, first of all, congratulations and welcome.
Yeah, I'm giving a moment. Yeah, round of applause. There we go. Go on, Lou.
Yeah, definitely 100% welcome and big celebration. You've worked out who you are, and that's really good and a really positive thing. So I think I'd say that, but also get to understand what being autistic means to you, because obviously it's so different for everyone. So you can do that kind of by thinking about your own experiences so far, or looking at other people's experiences online, talking to other autistic people you might know. So that can be quite helpful, but also thinking about what you would like in your life to change, if anything. So making adjustments for yourself, perhaps being a little bit less harsh on yourself. Now you have this understanding that actually, no, it's not that you need to like always adjust yourself, but actually society needs to adjust for you too. So kind of considering that, like, for example, when I was diagnosed, I at school had some different things put in place. So for example, I was then allowed to leave the classroom when I got overwhelmed. So instead of just sitting there and getting really stressed and upset, I'd actually give myself permission to think, actually, it's okay for me to take 5 minutes outside. I'm dealing with things that other people aren't necessarily dealing with in terms of in the sensory environment. So I think that kind of thing is really helpful. But just thinking about how you want to go forward, whether you want to tell people, whether you want to tell some people, whether you want to tell everyone, whether you don't really want to tell anyone at all. I guess just considering things like that can be quite helpful when you're first diagnosed too, in terms of like what's comfortable for you and how you want to move forward, because obviously everyone's very different and takes the process differently.
Lou, you are such a brilliant autism advocate. Can I just say, I'm
Thank
so
you.
like, yeah, wow, I want to play this podcast to everyone.
So I think the most important thing is to actually have those conversations, center autistic people's voices in them. And I think there's just this huge stigma attached to autism and neurodiversity generally. I think an attitude shift really needs to occur to recognize that difference is necessary and that it's beautiful, and it actually helps all of us, and to see the value in that instead of seeing it as something that needs to be changed or altered or hidden away.
I think that's a beautiful way to end our podcast. Thank you so much for all your insights today. It's been a joy having you on our podcast, and all the best. And let's hope that people listening, particularly our autistic community, will feel like, actually, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to add to the discussion that we've been having today, because it's been wonderful to hear how the landscape is changing. We've still got a really long way to go, but just hearing your experiences, particularly the stuff that has worked, is really inspiring. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business to be more neuro-inclusive, please visit auticon.com/UK. Recording and production was by Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown, edited by Billy Godfrey, and the music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.